What we discussed in the first segment was that building an aerobic base of a large volume of aerobic running early in the season helps runners preparing for a great range of distances from the middle distances on up. In this segment, we're going to talk more about specifics. First, let's talk about what happens when you change the season from a simple peak in the spring and a simple peak in the fall at shorter distances. When we decide that the peak is going to be a marathon, the pyramid no longer is quite as effective because as we reduce volume, we're getting closer to a long distance race. And by doing that, we're getting less and less specific to the demands of the race. So some people have turned the pyramid upside down and they've done the quality first and the mileage later. Other people have turned it on the side and mixed things up. And I think they're both onto something when it comes to preparing for longer distances. So when I was coached, we used the linear pyramid and it worked well because of the races that we were peaking for. But when I started coaching others, I ran into some problems using that pyramid. Again, the principles still apply, but we had to change a little bit how we arrange the season. What we found was when we did the endurance, the low intensity running from 60 to 75%, and we transitioned into stamina at 75 to 85%, everything went beautifully. It worked really well. When we went from stamina to economy, from the threshold 75, 85%, to the over threshold, the 90%, the really hard, dear God, make it stop type of running, that's when the injury spiked. And so it didn't take me too long to figure out we need to use some of that economy up here, maybe some stamina up here. So in the endurance phase, I wasn't nearly as strict as Lydiard was in keeping things low intensity. We'd throw some things in there, some steady state runs. We'd make sure that there was some aerobic speed in there, just so you weren't running slow all the time and try to change gears a few months later. When we got to stamina, I started adding a little bit of economy into the stamina phase. And that's the reason you see workouts like steady state runs with 4 to 6 times a minute hard at the end, is because I want to give you just a little bit of taste of this. So when we come from here to here, and then we do a full economy workout, maybe 12 times 400 meters, it's not such a shock to the system. You've done some of that type of running and you're better prepared for it. So that is still, if we're transitioning from those phases, we're still preparing for shorter races. If we want to get ready for a marathon or we want to race more often during the season, then we need to mix those phases up a little bit more. So when I started coaching, a lot of people wanted to peak for a half marathon in the spring and they wanted to maybe run a marathon in the fall. And they told me those were the 2 most important things, but then they'd give me a long list of other races they wanted to run along the way that were important to them. And I didn't want to tell them, okay, for this maybe 8 to 12 weeks, and this maybe 4 to 6 weeks or longer, you're not really going to be ready to race because we haven't done anything high intensity enough to prepare you for the demands of race day. So that was another reason why I had to start mixing in a little bit more speed and a little bit more economy in there. So that's why I'm in, borrowing a term from Arthur Lydiard, his coordination phase. It's why I've told people, somewhat jokingly, but serious as well, I'm in a perpetual coordination phase, because I'm trying to keep all of these things in balance throughout the season. And that's what I'm doing when I look at training plans and when I'm updating your plan, is I'm looking at our asset allocation. What's the most important race of the season? Where are we in that season? What should you be ready to do right now to be on track, to be ready for that? And if we find, right now you couldn't be within a minute of your mile PR, but we're preparing for a marathon, I might not care. If we're getting close to a marathon, we're maybe 8 weeks out and you're in great 5K shape, but you have a hard time with a long steady state run, we better reallocate our resources. We better change the types of workouts you're doing, or you're not going to be ready for the demands of your event. So I'm always looking at that. Are we in balance? So it brings up a good time to look, and you see some graphs at the top of the board there of how a season might look for different racers. The first graph is for someone preparing for a mile to 5K. The green line is their mileage. You see it starts at a reasonably good level, it goes up a little bit, and as we get close to the competition phase of the season, the mileage starts to drop. It'll drop a little bit more for the miler than the 5K runner in most cases. And then when we peak, that mileage will be down quite a bit from the high earlier in the season when we were building that aerobic base. Because for the miler and the 5K runner, we're building that aerobic base so they can really go out and crank some track workouts and get that high intensity work that they're going to need to carry that speed for those distances. Then we move over to 10K and a half marathon. The 10K is quite a race. It's twice as far as a 5K. Yes, Coach Obvious. But you don't get to slow down much. In many cases, you're slowing down by maybe 10 seconds a mile and going twice the distance. It is high-end aerobic until it's not, and then it's just flat out anaerobic to finish the race. So we need more strength going into that race. We need a higher volume of work to be able to maintain that pace. The half marathon may be the world's longest threshold race, because even mere mortals will typically average pretty close to 85% or so for a half marathon. So both those require more mileage. You'll see that we'll build that, and we'll continue to build into a competitive season. Some people might hang on a little bit longer. Others, if you have a number of races, we might start dropping that mileage to have you fresh for those races. And again, we'll typically maintain a little bit higher peak mileage for the half marathoners than the 10K. Now the marathon, no surprise here. We start a little bit higher with the mileage. We build higher and longer and maintain it longer. And the competitive season for a marathon may look a little bit different. As you're building mileage and you're adapting to it and feeling good and getting stronger and starting to do some of the stamina, maybe a touch of economy, and we're working some of that in, there might be some early races where you're fit and you're ready to go. But as we continue to build that mileage and the long runs are getting longer, the steady state runs are getting longer, the interval sessions are getting longer, there's that chronic fatigue that builds up in preparing for a marathon. So you might not really be ready to race there for a period, even though you've started racing. So we might do a few races, back off, really focus on training, and then as you start to rest a little bit, maybe pick up another race or two. There's many great examples of people preparing for a marathon and having great shorter races. Somewhat counterintuitive, but you get so strong, and if we've mixed a little bit of all of the elements in there, you're ready to go. If we look at 1982, a fellow maybe you heard of, Alberto Salazar, was on top of the world at that point. He lost a tight battle with Henry Rono. If you don't know who he is, you might look him up. He had some good days on the track as well. He ran 27:30, very close to his best 10K ever. Actually, at the time, I believe that it was. Less than 2 weeks later, he won the Duel in the Sun in Boston, his fastest marathon time ever. And then later that summer, June and July, I believe, he set his 5K and 10K PR. So he was able to mix in all of those elements properly in order to run a really good 5K, 10K, and marathon. So what I would encourage you to do is, if the marathon is most important to you, make sure we're getting that mix and mix in a few of the other races. You're doing a lot of training. It's good to get those rewards and cash in a few PRs. The thing that I never could appreciate about the marathon was it's a lot of eggs in one basket. And you might be training for 4 or 6 months for this race. And anything can happen on the day. Those of you who ran Boston in a hurricane a few years ago know it didn't matter how well prepared you were, that day it was not going to be your best time ever. So if you had some other races leading up to that you could say, look, my training was great, I was fit, this day didn't work out quite as I'd hoped, but I know what I'm doing is working, and I'm going to build on that next time I come back, and maybe I catch a better weather day and run the time that I was hoping to run. So let's mix all of that in. So That gives you a little bit more information on how we're building a base, why we're building a base, how it might look different. In the next segment, we're going to talk about how to tailor it to you.